And that's what's happened more and more to this Ba thing. Although I would have, you claim that the young people now still intensely brood or think about Ba, whereas I got the impression that the government under Tung-Hui set up this commission to make an apology, to memorialize the victims, to pay compensation. There's been new books, there's a whole series of scholarly factual accounts of Ba. A lot of records have been dredged up. I would have thought that gradually this is being put into the past and forgotten. But I guess in the passions of this recent election, this is not so.
These things, these findings that you're referring to, I don't believe that they're widely read or referred to. I think
they were in the newspaper, very, you know, they made the newspaper and the journals for weeks on end. I suppose people just, young people who came up and didn't know that probably are just not that well informed.
I think it has a lot to do with the Chen administration starting in 2000, the way that they were referring to 228, you know, the way the plaque is written, you know, and in the Taipei 228 Peace Park, and you know, that memorial center in Kaohsiung where they have like a exhibit and everything. It's extremely one-sided. It was just, so therefore I don't think, at least the people I've interacted with, they don't know what you're talking about. I strongly feel that everyone I interact with truly believes that 228 was an extremely one-sided affair, except for a few cases, you know, very little. My uncle was...
Well, it was one-sided in the sense that the cruel, brutal suppression did lead to the slaughter of a lot of innocent people. And you can argue about the figures, but the point is, even if you're like someone like myself, who believes that the number of killings was much less than the amount that many people refer to, I think in terms of a range of maybe, you know, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people killed, including casualties. But my reaction is, look, this was a very peaceful society under Japanese colonialism. After 1903, it became a very, very calm, orderly society for decades and decades and decades. And people were very rule-abiding and went about their business. And so that when this war ended, and then this awful event occurred, and then these, even a small number of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people, that is a tragedy beyond belief. You know, you don't use those figures to minimize the tragedy. The tragedy was still very, very deeply etched in people's minds, and it was transmitted by word of mouth all over the island. Families kept telling their children every generation, and so it was a pretty horrible thing.
KMT, had they won the election this year, like, would they go back to those measures in the early 80s? Because I think you just sort of, like, I can't imagine that happening, but like
that to me is just impossible. That there would be, if the KMT had somehow won the March 20th election, there would have been no reversion to martial rule, martial law, and there would be no attempt to roll the clock back to the very authoritarian regime that we remember Taiwan as it was in the 70s and 60s and 50s. When you get to the 90s and finally to the present, these last 15 years, where you've had regular elections and a very open press, that can pretty well print what it wants. Free travel, people being able to verbally express what they want. People can get a permission from the local police and have a demonstration. There's just absolutely no way the KMT would have been able to have any moral or legal authority to change the clock back. I know of no one in the party who ever talked that way or even thought that was remotely possible. So that for young people to think that way, and some of the ways you've described to me, make me pause and wonder just exactly what they've been reading and what is it that influences them to think that way. Well, the most democratic body, which is most quarrelsome, where there's a big division and a split, is the Legislative Yuan. And now for any laws to be passed, they have to be passed through the Legislative Yuan. And there's just no way that the KMT, with the small margin that it's had in that body, and now I think it probably doesn't even have that margin anymore, could remotely do anything like that. But even to make my argument more compelling, I would submit that the KMT leadership itself would just doesn't. I've never heard anybody ever conjecture that that would be a possibility, that turning the clock back, changing the laws, and imposing a repressive political system on Taiwan citizens. It's just impossible. Well, I'm just saying that I don't think that opinion is shared by very many in the KMT party at all, or in that alliance. I just know of no tangible evidence, articles written in the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years that suggests that they would even do such a thing. Just try to roll the clock back on democracy.
Vincent and Tung-Hui were around in the early 80s, and you know they've been painted as they have like a reputation for putting people away, and now that their actions with these protests are not law-abiding, and therefore they've shown their true character. That they have no respect for the law. These protests, they're saying that these protests show that they have no respect for the law.
Well, Lien Zhan's tried to serve Lee Tung-Hui as well as he could, I guess, and this is a man I think who certainly respects the law, and look at the way the KMT behaved on Friday of March 19th, for heaven's sakes. Out of respect for democracy and the president, they decided not to campaign at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And they decided to tell their supporters all over the island, go home. Is this a party that is going to turn the clock back and try to revive martial law if they were to have power? I don't think so.
What do you mean by utopian?
I mean that they have this view of seeing human behavior totally in terms of black and white. There's no nuanced gray, and an attempt to see the complexity and to judge people's attempts to make decisions under terribly difficult, complex circumstances. And they have a quick fix answer that will solve the problem. And so that it's very difficult to talk to people with that kind of a mindset, that see the world very much in black and white.
Yes.
And a lot of Chinese thinkers who have written about democracy and authoritarianism and so forth write in very utopian ways about the world around them. But that's another topic of great complexity. We probably should avoid that.
Yeah, it's been difficult for me because
of the people you've had to interview.
well, I have young Green Party supporters constantly telling me that I should have lost respect for the articles that I'm reading, English written articles, are all emphasizing the Pan-Blue camp has completely embarrassed itself with these protests, that they're completely illegitimate, they have no proof, so therefore they have no respect for the law, and I've been personally pushed to lose respect for these protests, that Lin and Song are just hate mongers, and that this is just, they're just being completely ridiculous and trying to destroy the country's democracy.
Right.
That's the consensus.
Well, that represents one side of the big divide that Taiwan finds itself in now, including overseas Chinese communities. People, we have that same very sharp division in our society and political system today, too, between Democrats and Republicans. It's become a very, very sharply divided society. And that happens when ideology and political issues become so personalized by individuals.